Hello and welcome to a Talmud Israeli production. Today we'll review the highlights of this week's course of Daf Yomi study, Masechet Kiddushin, pages 63 through 69, Samach Gimel through Samach Tet. 63. Almanat sheyirtze Abba. If a man betroths a woman on condition that his father approve of this union, Rotza Av Mekudeshet. If daddy approves, then fine, the marriage is valid. V'im lav eina Mekudeshet. And if it turns out he doesn't approve, then it was no marriage. Meta'av, what happens if the father dies before we find out what his opinion is? Harezim Mukudeshet, behold, the marriage is valid. Because after all, it was only a question of whether he would reject it, and that would ruin its viability. But now that he's no longer around to reject it, his acceptance is no longer required either. The marriage is kosher, it's valid. Metaben, what happens if the son died? Then the father is alive, and he could either choose to say, I liked it or I didn't like it. And if he says he liked it, then this woman is now a widow, subject and available to Yibum. If it turned out the father didn't like the marriage and the son is dead, well, there was no marriage and the woman is free to go. So Malamdin Ha'av Lomar Shenorotza, we teach the father of the boy to say, I didn't want this marriage at all anyway. Why? Because we don't want her to be subjected to Yibum. We want her to be a free person to marry whoever she likes. Samach Daled, 64. Misha Amar Beshat Mitato, Yesh Li Banim, Ne'eman. If a person, a man on his deathbed says, I have sons, I have children, we believe him. In other words, this man was assumed to be childless, and as a result of that, the woman would be subject to Yibum. But if he says, it turns out I have sons, maybe from previous marriage, previous girlfriend, whatever it might be, so then she's no Yibum for her. We'll believe him, and she's free to go. No chalitza. Yesh liachim, if he was thought to not have any brothers, and he also didn't have any children, and now he says, but it turns out I have brothers who are available for Yibum, eno ne'eman. We don't believe him. Why? Ne'eman lahatir. We believe him on his deathbed to release her from any restrictions of a levirate marriage. Ve'ne'eman le'asor, but we will not believe him to change his tune on his deathbed to force her into a Yibum situation, to constrict her marital prospects. Samachay, 65. Hamakadosh be'erechad in choshen the Kiddushin. If a person were to betroth, a man to betroth a woman in the presence of one witness, we do not suspect or concern ourselves with the possibility that this marriage is a valid marriage. Rather, it's not. One witness was insufficient to create a marriage here. Even if the two principal parties, the boy and the girl, the chassan and kala, say, yeah, we got married in the presence of this guy, they confirm, they corroborate what he said, doesn't matter. Why not? Because Kiddushin requires the presence of two witnesses, and the absence of two witnesses is simply has no standing. It's not a matter of corroborating the truth. It's a matter of whether or not this was chal, whether it had legal effect. Samach Vav, 66. Yanai was a bad king, Hasmonean king, a brutal fellow. Yanai HaMelech also was the Kohen Gadol. So, at one point, there was criticism of him holding both positions, king and high priest. Usually, we think of the Hasmoneans as having usurped the kingship from the tribe of Yehuda, from the Davidic dynasty, from the Malchut Beit David. However, truth of the matter is that any tribe could produce kings in Israel. The only thing that they couldn't do was be Kohanim if they were not legitimate sons of Aaron. And what? The Hasmoneans were not from the high priestly family. They were legitimate Kohanim, but they were not Bnei Tzadok. So they actually, more than usurping the kingship, you really usurped the high priesthood. So the Gemara says that a person who was a troublemaker said to Yanai, Rav lecha keter malchut, it's enough that you should be the king. Hanach ketekuna la'azar shel Aaron. Leave the priesthood to the true sons of Aaron. Because it was claimed that this guy's mother, Yanai's mother, had been a captive in Modi'in, the Hasmonean town, back in the old days during the war. And if a Kohanic wife was taken captive, she can no longer be with her husband. And since this Yanai was born after that episode, he would not be a valid Kohen. So this troublemaker was casting aspersions on the priestly status of the king with a lot of power. The matter was investigated, and it turned out Yanai's mother had not been taken captive, but the accusation was made, and people paid a price. There was a lot of murder and butchery after that. Samach Zayin, 67. Amar Kra, it says in the Torah, anyone who does any of these things, abominable things, shall be cut off. Current penalty. All the incestuous unions are compared to the wife's sister. Just as if you try to betroth your wife's sister, okay, while the ex-wife is, or even present wife is still alive, it doesn't take effect. So too, all of the arayot, the incestuous unions, will not take effect. Even if you attempt a kiddushin, it fails. Samachet, 68. Vlada kamota nachrit milan. How do we know that the child of a Jewish man and a non-Jewish woman is following her legal status as a non-Jew? As the Torah says, because you will sway your son away from me. That when there's too close of a connection between the Jews and the Gentiles, and there'll be what amounts to intermarriage, the boy who could have been a Jew will be taken away towards idolatrous worship. Bincha bam Yisrael kari bincha. So the pasuk is interpreted to mean your son from a Hebrew woman is called your son. But your son from a heathen woman is not called your son, rather her son. And so a Jewish man who sires a child from a heathen woman, it's not really his son, not called his son, is not a Jew. Samachtet, 69. Rabbi Tarfon Omer, Rabbi Tarfon says it's possible to purify someone of the mamzer status. Now this is a bit of a surprise because mamzer status extends from generation to generation. How could you purify someone of mamzer status? Well, the following way. Mamzer shanasa shivcha, if a male mamzer, a Jew, marries a shivcha Canaanite, a Canaanite slave girl, havlad kemota, the slave, the boy that born has her status as Eved Kanani. Shichraro, you then emancipate that boy. Nimtza ben Chorin. It turns out he's a full-fledged Jew. He's an emancipated Eved Kanani without the stigma of Mamzerut. Lo and behold, the stigma is gone. Everyone have a great week.